Recording started.
There you go. Okay. Now that it's started, I think I can start. So my name is Valerie Taylor, and I'm a professor of computer science and engineering at Texas A&M University, and I'm also executive director of a new organization called the Center for Minorities and People with Disabilities in IT. And so this is a nonprofit organization, and I'll give an overview about it and then talk about some of our programs, because we target, and I will explain why we target minorities and people with disabilities. That's one group. So in terms of need, we look at it in terms of workforce issues, that when you look at the demographics of the population, according to the census with the projections of 2050, that if we take Black, Hispanics, Native Americans, and also people with disabilities, we're well beyond 50% of the population. And with people with disabilities, that's based upon using about 17% of the population is usually considered, is identified as either visually impaired, hearing impaired, or physically impaired. And so we look at this and say a need for diverse perspectives with respect to product innovation and also development, and also there's a need for inclusion as IT impacts society given its prevalence in so many areas. So with that in mind, our vision is to look at a national need for an effective workforce in computing and IT through inclusive activities related to minorities and people with disabilities is our overall vision. We look at our target group as being composed of African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanics, and people with disabilities. And the combination across those groups is there's a need to understand culture to really be inclusive. Without that in-depth understanding of culture, oftentimes mistakes are made with respect to vocabulary, mistakes are made in terms of how to really be inclusive. And I think it's often very recognized about the need for culture when you talk about minorities, but when you also talk about people with disabilities, it's understanding how to be inclusive with disabilities as well. So that's the reason for that focus across minorities and people with disabilities.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please ask questions throughout comments.
Can you define what some of those disabilities are? I'm curious.
Okay, in terms of visually, disability is the blind.
Okay.
Okay, and in some cases they can, I've even seen surveys to define it in terms of wearing contacts.
Oh, really?
So you really have to understand the survey questions and how they define it when they talk about disabilities. Oftentimes, but the usual notion is in terms of visual disability is completely blind. It may have a percentage of, some people may not be completely, but it may be a percentage, or it may be dependent upon the survey, wearing glasses. Then physically disabled has to do, and that's a wide variance in terms of going all the way to a wheelchair, to a limb, where you have a physical disability, where you need help in terms of being able to interact physically. And then you also have hearing, thank you, hearing impaired. And so that's with the deaf.
I just find that interesting. I mean, helping the disabled, but you have the ethnicities in their own circles where I see that people with disabilities can be any ethnicity.
Right. Well, what we did, and we've had long discussions about this with people with disabilities, if we should break it out or not, and we said no, we're going to leave it here. And actually, a lot of the studies, sometimes studies may break it out, sometimes studies do not. But in that way, we're encompassing, and it's not where we leave anything out, so we can be broad-based.
Particularly if you're looking at it from a cultural standpoint, right? Because even people from the other three groups, because of their disabilities, there's a
commonality.
There's a commonality around that group that can create a difference or a subculture in the way people interact.
Right. So it's not to say that it's African American and disabled. It's African American and or. disabled.
Right.
Right.
So one thing that I'm curious about, maybe it's coming later, if so, I apologize, is that in the work that I do, I tend to like to be very detail-oriented about a lot of specifics. And so do you have a universal schema that you feel cuts across things? Because it's like just taking disabilities, there's so much detailed information one would need to know to be able to truly be inclusive. And, you know, depending upon the type of disability, you know, and just in each of the cultural groups as well. So to really close the loop and have all that kind of specific information would be a huge amount of information to convey. And while there's some commonalities among groups, not all common. And so I'm curious if you have a schema that you use that sort of you think cuts across, or if you just try to address as many specifics as possible when you're working on inclusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, and it's more of the latter. So, depending on
more the latter for a specific group, because I just thought about this in a bit. I've angst about this a lot, and so I was curious for your perspective.
Right, and what we do with Commanded, with all of our activities, we try to work on synergistic activities because you have a lot of groups where there may be a focus on people with disabilities. And they've done a lot. For example, there's access computing, there's knowability, you know, there's National Federation of the Blind. There are different organizations where you can find a lot of literature and background and material that has to do with how to be more inclusive. You also have that for Hispanics and also African American, Native American. Our goal with Commanded is to cut across all four, such that when we look at our activity, it's inclusive across all four. So we do not have any activities that target one particular group, because we think a lot is being done in that area already, but what we found that was missing was cutting across so that we can come together and talk about possibly some synergistic activities, raise some political awareness, because now you have the large numbers. You're looking at over 50% of the population when you cut across all four groups. And go ahead.
So you're trying to maybe like find things that if you're a teacher, instructor, professor, that you should be asking yourself to try to get information if you have that particular one in your class.
Right. And yes, well actually, let me go a little more into detail. So here's our executive committee, and I'm going to go over our mission, and that'll give a little more detail. So our executive committee consists of Richard Latner, Deputy Director, and so Richard is also active with Access Computing, which does a lot in terms of people with disabilities and inclusion. Janine Cook also does a great deal with disabilities. She's also paraplegic. We have Ron Eglash, who's at RPI, and he does a great deal with ethnomathematics and looking at incorporating culture into the teaching of math. And also Brian York at Portland State, who's been doing a great deal in the area of diversity. And so it's a really good group with the executive committee. In terms of our mission, and this is getting more into our activities, and that's where we look at it as cyclic. We look at it to ensure that underrepresented groups are fully engaged in computing the information and technology. So that's the engagement that has to do with increasing interest, also looking at retention, and also looking at professional development. But then we said there also needs to be this feeding back to the community, where now you want to promote innovation that enriches, enhances, and enables these communities. So we want it to be both ways, and not just one way. We felt that was really important.
So I like that enable the community. So when dealing with minorities, as you educate them, then do they take that back into their own community and contribute that education so they can relate with their community and so on?
Right, and I'm going to go over a project that we're just initiating to do just that, to give back to the community. Yes. So, and here's some of our programs that we offer. Here's all of our programs, actually. So, related to the engagement, we have some workshops we've been doing with professional development, and I'll describe that in a little more detail in just a few minutes. Then we also have, related to engagement, we have a project that's funded by the National Science Foundation that's related to ethnomathematics that looks at using these tools, and these are culturally situated design tools for teaching math, incorporating those into after-school programs, such as the Boys and Girls Club. And so our target group, we target about 4th graders up to about 7th graders. So those tools, for example, may teach about geometry using coin rolls, which is the braiding. And so there, if you start with a Y, you can do things like translation, dilation. You can start with a break dance for the kids like that to learn angles and actually program your break dancer for each frame and then have your break dancer do these dances. So it's really a lot of fun. It's also like Native American, having basket weaving with different designs. There's a graffiti grapher. Some sites don't want that. Like they don't want to encourage graffiti, graffiti. Go with on the computer. So we're having a lot of fun with the culturally relevant tools with the Boys and Girls Club. So I'm not going to go into detail about that today. We're also starting a video gallery of researchers, minority and disabled researchers. And there our goal is to not just talk about their research, but also their outside lives, so that students can relate to them in some way. And you don't just see the polished end result. And then we have a student competition that gets more at projects that are more inviting for entry-level programming courses. And so I'm going to go over the video gallery and the student competition a little bit in professional development. With respect to promoting innovation to go back to the community, we're starting this new workshop, Diversity as an Innovation Resource, and I'll describe that. That's a lot of fun of leveraging projects nationwide to actually solve a societal problem. And we've done some work with graduation statistics, just getting the data from existing databases to say where are we in terms of our graduation rates. Because we found that we could see a lot have been done in terms of women, but when you would ask about graduation rates with minorities, we would hear the numbers are too low. But the numbers are there, so we said, let's try to get that data. And then we do have an e-newsletter. So with Commanded, we look at going across the ethnicities and people with disabilities to look at linkages for national scale efforts, such as the Boys and Girls Club, looking at a national agenda for transformative change, also looking at organized leadership initiatives, and this has to do with the professional development, and also being a resource for information and statistics, and also linkages to other organizations and sites. So with respect to the professional development, we actually have 3 areas. We're faculty, also looking at national labs and students. With the faculty, this is joint with the Coalition to Diversify Computing, which is another organization, and also Access Computing and the Computing Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institutions. It's been funded by NSF since 2007. It started in 2005. And our goal with this workshop is for underrepresented groups, for senior grad students and junior faculty to talk about the tenure process at a range of institutions, and also to have participants or panelists that also are from underrepresented groups. So then it gets at what was mentioned previously, role models, and learning from experiences that have worked. The National Labs, because of the success with the faculty, this year we received funding from DOE to actually work with the National Labs. And so there is something similar where you're talking about research groups, but now you're also going into more details about team dynamics, because that becomes really important in the National Labs. And we're also doing more in terms of proposal writing with the National Lab. We're doing, with the faculty, we have a significant proposal writing component with the faculty workshop, where with the faculty workshop for the proposal writing, we assign proposals to participants prior to coming to the workshop. Then we go over details of what does it mean to have a successful proposal, and we also have mock reviews for the proposals that they're assigned. So they do go through a mock review, and in that way they get access to actual proposals that have been funded and some that have not been funded. So they can really see and have some concrete examples of the difference. Then a new one that we're starting next year is with students, and this is at the baccalaureate and master's level, joint with industry, and it's to prepare students for internships, the interview process for internships, and also getting permanent job offers. Because what they're finding is that while students have the GPA, they don't make it through the interview process because of sometimes of the way they're presenting themselves. But what happens is that you don't get that feedback until you don't get the job. So our goal is to have this workshop is scheduled for August at the University of Washington, in which we're going to have mock interviews and 15-minute mock interviews with students who go through 2 mock interviews so they can get some feedback. We'll also have panelists with industry that's talking about the interview process, communication, resume writing, to really go in depth. And it's very short, like a Friday to Saturday, right before classes start. So I welcome feedback, comments, suggestions, questions. And just to give you an idea with the academic workshop, because we do, because it's funded by NSF, we do include a fair amount of assessment with all of our activities. So with the academic workshop, for example, the chart actually describes people's self-assessment prior to the workshop versus after the workshop, and this is about a month after, so it is self-assessment. But for example, the grant writing skills, we're happy to see that it went from 1.77, and it's out of a 5 scale, to 3.54. So they do feel more confident about the grant writing. We also, the knowledge about obtaining funding, we were happy to see that increase as well, because we do have a panel from different agencies to talk about what does it entail to write proposals for their agencies. We talk about the ability to write a research proposal. It goes more into detail about that. Ability to identify an academic mentor. I think most people feel pretty comfortable with that area. And we do discuss professionalism, because that's important. We find participants come in and they feel like they are pretty knowledgeable about professionalism, but things such as interacting with students in the class, we talk about that. Like if students want to go out with you to the movies, what does that mean in terms of the group dynamics in your class and the impact? Because oftentimes the scope with respect to professionalism is within their world and not taking into consideration the impact that it has with the students. And so we find that to be really important. But it's interesting that it starts off pretty high. And so this just gives some example of the makeup of the workshop. And it wasn't until March 2010 that we started really doing a lot in terms of people with disabilities. And so that's why you see dashes before that. In terms of what's made of disabilities. So it ranges from hearing impaired, physically impaired, sight impaired. And so with the workshop, what we do is we manage the dynamics. So we let people know that it's not where it can be this fast interaction. You can only ask the question when the moderator points to you. You state your name, ask the question. So that way it changes the flow so that it's more engaging. We also have interpreters there for hearing impaired. People present slides ahead of time. So we work hard on that.
And work with staff, students, so I'm interested in talking to you after this.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Okay. And so it's been a learning, I think, for all of us. And we've even learned, like I know the slide would not be the best. So we've learning about how to design our slides. Right. Some of the longitudinal results. So we look back in November 2005, where we just got funding together from different resources, and we just had 12 assistant professors there. But we're happy to say that they're all tenured at different places, and some of them have even gone on to get career awards. So that's really good. Some other aspects, the graduation statistics. And this actually is from the Department of Education, from NCES, their database. So that's what we access. So we could get associate degrees. So it's very interesting that blacks are almost at par in terms of the graduate percentage of total degrees. At the associate's degree level, you have Hispanics at around the 10% range, and Native Americans, which is about 1%.
So I have a question. This is interesting. On the top chart, what caused the downgrade? Was there any explanation that it seemed to just flatten out?
You mean over in here?
Yeah, from 03, and then it flattens out around 07.
Right. So there, I think, is what we've seen nationwide with the .com issue, and also the issue of feeling that jobs have gone overseas. So no jobs, at that point in time, the feeling in terms of what you saw in the media was offshoring.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's called globalization. So
I find interesting too, on the top one, black non-Hispanic, the recession hit around 08, and that's when it started to go up. I find that interesting.
Right, but the interesting thing is, it's not so much the recession, because even though with the recession, you still had a lot of IT jobs increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happened here was, the .com burst combined with offshoring, so it was the feeling that there were no jobs. But there were jobs, and the jobs were coming back. So now you have this shortage, and everybody's hearing that the fastest growing job, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, is in IT, in software, in technology. So you're starting to see that go back up. So even though it's a recession, the issue that comes up is where are the jobs?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody needs IT, and now everybody has an iPhone, everybody has IT, so you go, yeah, I can see the need for it, because I need it.
Well, another way of looking at that, though, because I teach for University of Phoenix. I've been teaching since 2000. And when the .com bubble hit, our enrollment went up.
Mm-hmm.
Because people were going back to school, and that might correlate to that, too. It went down when people began to figure out there were other places to go get jobs, things like that. And now it's starting to, and it went down, but now it's starting to go back up. I think for the same reason is that, people are saying, okay, I got to change or diversify what I do because, and they come back and they want the IT.
You teach because IT.
No, I actually teach management leadership, but this is why I'm here. This is what I'm doing.
Right, so it's very interesting, the numbers, but the percentages. So the percentages stayed about constant. So the actual numbers tracked with the overall enrollment. So yeah. And then
I'm not that surprised. I'm not that surprised. You're saying that for African Americans, they're proportional for their associate degrees. Is that what I understood you were saying?
Right.
And I'm not that surprised because, well, disproportionately, African Americans will start off in tier colleges because it costs less to do so for their degrees in STEM.
Well, here's the interesting thing, okay, and I'm going to show you some more data that's very interesting. So here's the bachelor's degrees, okay? And this is from, again, from the Department of Education, NCES, where this includes PhD granting institutions, for-profit institutions, also undergraduate institution, MSI, and again, African Americans about 10%, and you look at the population, African Americans about 13%, 12 to 13% of the population. Hispanics is going up in terms of the percentage, just by a little, but it's between 5 to 7%. Hispanics now, I think, are in the 16%, and that's where the biggest growth is doubling to about 30% when you talk about the growth. Native American is still, I think even in 2050, is only 2% of the population. And so it's interesting that it's still, for associates, is at 14%, and here it's 10%. But what we did was, we looked at that data and compared it to this data that's put out by the Computing Research Association, the TALBE report. And the TALBE report consists mainly of PhD granting institutions. Okay. When you look at PhD granting institutions, you're less than 4%. And then if you go back to all institutions, you're around the 10%. So there's a very big gap, and we've been having some discussions about that, because if PhD granting institutions only want to go to other PhD granting institutions, you're not going to increase the diversity of your grad student population, because you're starting off really small.
What do you mean only want to go?
To recruit.
Oh, I see.
So graduate programs for their PhD programs, then, because the discussion that comes up is when you get to, and we have some data, we went all the way up to the PhD in terms of looking at the different data. So the data between the Department of Education and the TALBE data is about the same when you get to the number of PhD degrees, because it's PhD granting institutions. And the issue, and that number, you're around like 1%, no more than 2%. And so the question that comes up that a lot of PhD granting institutions are looking at is how to increase the diversity of their graduate student population. And the issue that comes up is, where do you go to recruit for your graduate student population? If you're going to other PhD granting institutions,
You mean where you're getting their 4-year degrees?
right, whereas if they go to other PhD granting institutions, not all of those students are going to go to grad school, which means that they're not going to increase their diversity by just going to other PhD granting institutions. You need to make connections with undergraduate institutions, MSIs, also for-profit. And the question that comes up is looking at, and we haven't disaggregated, and we're starting to do this now, to see what are the trends when you look at for-profit versus the PhD granting institutions versus undergraduate institutions and MSIs. If the feeling is that with the for-profits, you see an increase in terms of the diversity with the for-profits. But you don't see that same increase with undergraduate institutions and PhD granting institutions. So and while a person would speculate and say, well, maybe it's more flexibility with the schedule, or maybe it's economic. But then partly, too, it's also PR as well. Because, we talk about this at Texas A&M. How do we advertise about, what goes on at Texas A&M? We have this website, and the assumption is students will come to the website, and so it shall be. There's no, advertisement, enticement.
What about connecting with the two colleges?
Right.
I mean, I think actually that's good. And your data shows there's a drop-off between those who go from 2 to 4-year. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Mary Rowland, but she's been very successful in increasing both the number of women and minority students in engineering at our ASU, Arizona State University. And then successfully, because it's a persistent program, I mean, we actually use some of her data. She was the keynote of one of our NSF-funded project conferences. She actually has been very successful in then getting those same students that started at community college. They actually have a higher retention rate overall as a group, and more go on to PhD programs. And so she's got a really good model, and most of what she does is actually teach them study skills and time management skills and using the 4.0 system. And so it would seem to me, and also disproportionately, I don't know if it's true for all people of color, but I know for African Americans that have PhDs, they started off into your college compared to the general population. And so it would seem to me that would really actually be the key.
Yes, and that's actually the discussion with this slide, because this slide is actually showing associate's degree and bachelor's degree, and actually you can't see the color. But let's try to
Oh, wonderful.
Okay. So here is very interesting because this is the total with the bachelor's degree and also associate's degree. So in general, when you look at the total degrees, the bachelor's degree outnumbers just for overall population. But when you break it down into African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanics, and that's what you have here, what you're finding is that the associate's degree, the numbers, are almost the same in terms of associate's and bachelor's degree. And in some cases, the associate's degree outnumbers the bachelor's degree, which goes right to the heart of your point in terms of undergraduate institutions, or four-year institutions, making partnerships with community colleges because the numbers are there.
Are these the highest degrees that a person has earned?
No, these are just graduation
rates. From an AA may also get their BS, and that person's counted in both, correct?
Well, they're not counted in both for that year. Okay.
Oh,
so,
okay, for that year.
Right.
Okay, that's true. Right,
Yeah,
because they have to go a little further.
Right, so they may be here, and then they may be here
the next year, right?
Right. Yes.
But it's good numbers when you mix them all together, the totals.
Right.
That's very impressive.
Right, so it shows the trend differs for total population than it does for minority population, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So the total number of degrees has declined by that much in 4 years?
Yes.
Those are graduations.
Right. Right. The degrees. The bachelor's degree
Per year.
For the general population, we're looking at, right?
Right.
This is U.S.-wide versus regional at all?
This is U.S., so it's based on the Department of Education, the NCES database.
It would be interesting to see 2010 and 11.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay, I just want to go back to why you went to my... Right, but if you look at it, this actually reflects the decrease in enrollment in computer science that occurred from .com. Right. This is computer science. Yeah, so this is, right, so we focus solely on, I know, a little. Yeah, so we focus solely on computer science so that way we could do this comparison with the Talby results. Because Talby does computer science and computer engineering. In computer engineering, they're not representative of computer engineering, really. They're more representative of computer science.
Do you do IT? Do they separate computer science? IT is the same degree, or are you just focusing on computer science?
Just focusing on computer science, because what we wanted to do was to see, because Talby was saying, the issue that came up was, Talby was saying, well, minorities are still a small percentage. And then there was a congresswoman in Texas who said we are at par when you look at the graduation rates of African Americans. So then we said, okay, you know, let's look at the differences. And the differences stem from what's going on in PhD granting institutions versus what's going on overall in institutions. And that's what we wanted to show, the differences. But to make that comparison, we focused solely on computer science so that we would make an accurate comparison. And then, and it just depends on how people do classification. So we try to be consistent. Tally doesn't do information technology in their data collection. They do computer engineering, but it's really only computer engineering when it's in a computer science program. And we know a lot of computer engineering programs are in electrical engineering. So you're not really representative of the community. So that's an example of some of the things we've done with the graduation rate. And I'll just mention the student competition. And here, our focus has been on freshman level programming course. And in looking at our courses, we recognize that our projects that we have, while the faculty are all excited about the projects, oftentimes the students are not. And especially the minority students are not. And so we had a competition and we asked students to actually propose projects for students from underrepresented groups. And we gave them resources where they could find out about different cultures. And we said the students just had to be undergraduates. They didn't even have to be in computer science. So we were like, if it were me, I would go get somebody in social science to help me with the project. But it didn't always occur. And so actually the first award we gave out in 2011 were the two projects that were very interesting. One was related to music and how you can add your culture to music, and you can have that as a project for a first year project. And also in terms of disability, you could talk about the interface that you would need for visually impaired, hearing impaired to actually participate with the music. And the second project had to do with health and diabetes, because it was indicated that different levels in which you need insulin can vary by culture. And so including that component in it. So those were our first two projects, and right now what we're doing with the project is actually breaking them down into curriculum to problems that can be disseminated for next fall semester. So that's what we're doing now. But it was fun to read all the different projects that students had in mind. And so we'll continue this. We said we first want to get the curriculum materials available, and then in 2013 we'll have another competition. But that was okay. Another topic, and I just have two more topics. Another area that we're doing is a video gallery of researchers, and this is kind of fun. So we try to capture the full life of a researcher, and it's funded by NSF. And so our first two include Charles Isbell, who's a researcher at Georgia Tech in the area of artificial intelligence, but he's also really into hip-hop. So his hip-hop name is Homeboy from Hell. I wonder how many... Yeah, so it's interesting the way he set up his house, and and he talks about the hip-hop. Then we have Janine Cook, who became disabled due to a car accident. So she was a professional figure skater. But she looks at it to say it's actually a good thing. So she does horseback riding, she drives a car, she rides a bike, she's very active. So we have, and I won't show them, but we have videos with Charles and Janine where we're just doing the cuts on them now. But it's really fascinating. And so we're looking at disseminating, we'll have a right now we have the 20-minute version, and we're looking at doing a 7 to 10-minute version that will disseminate in YouTube, after school, different school systems. And so, what we want to do is to invite participants to add to the gallery of researchers, but what we want is to have the full life of a researcher and not just about their research, so that way students can relate to the person and see that they do have kids, they have a family, they're not just this researcher. And the last thing I'll just mention was commanded is one thing we're doing is the diversity of the innovation resource, and our goal is that there are a number of projects going on nationwide, and the projects could be to engage high school students in computing. It could be senior or sophomore level project courses, industry outreach initiatives, like Microsoft has its Imagine Cup, which is project-based, that's related to company competition, or projects to retain undergraduates in computing. To have those projects actually now relate to a community issue, and this is our giving back to the community. So the first area is focused on math education delivery for middle school students and underserved communities. And as was mentioned earlier in this morning's talk with Project Tomorrow, with their Speak Up 2010 report about the number that have smartphones and cell phones. So what we're really looking at is math education delivery for mobile devices. So our goal is to have a meeting to bring together researchers in ethnomathematics, where you add culture to math, high school teachers, principals, students, also people in technology with mobile devices, to get together over 2 days, and we have the dates at AAAS as a co-sponsor, to talk about what would be some projects that would be engaging, and then to make those projects available to the community by August. So we have some people that have already said they would sign up to engage in those projects. So we'll have people where you check out a project, and that way we could track it. And then in 18 months, the goal is to have some apps that are deliverable to the schools that are engaged in the workshop, such that those apps complement what the teachers are doing in the classroom. So that's what we're doing with this one. And I'll just stop here. And so here's the planning committee. So it's a range of people in curriculum. Like Gloria Hopper does teacher development. We have some teachers involved. And right now we're sending out invites. There'll be a white paper required for all the participants in the workshop. So our goal is to have about 50, at most 50 participants. And we'll also have some speakers talking about innovation, because part of it is looking at the project as also encouraging innovation with the students. And we'll have assessments such that we determine that it excites students knowing that they were part of a national initiative, that it excites students because they could add culture to the project, so we can actually assess that as well with the project. So those are some of the things we're doing with Commanded, but I invite a discussion about engaging minorities and people with disabilities in IT. With that, I'll stop.